democracy.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report. You're watching America 360 on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Senior Pentagon officials led by Army Secretary Dan Driscoll has arrived in Kyiv to meet President Zelensky and discuss efforts to end the war with Russia. The visit comes as reports emerge of a new peace plan and after a Russian strike killed at least 26 people in Chernobyl. US President Donald Trump has said that he will host New York Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, he's 34, for a meeting on Friday. Despite their previously fierce public clashes, the meeting marks a significant turn in relations after Trump repeatedly attacked Mamdani during the mayoral campaign. President Donald Trump has said that he has signed a bill requiring the release of government documents on Jeffrey Epstein. Trump, who had earlier opposed the measure, announces on Truth Social that he has just signed the bill. Pfizer and Tris Pharma have agreed to a $41.5 million settlement with Texas in U.S. to resolve claims that they defrauded the state's Medicaid program over quality control failures in an ADHD medication. The Texas lawsuit alleged the companies misled the state about the drug's effectiveness, leading to improper Medicaid payments. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has reasserted his global roadmap to phase out fossil fuels at COP30 summit that is ongoing in Belém, pushing negotiators to advance a draft pact despite sharp divisions between oil-producing states and the coalition of 80-plus countries supporting the plan. Lula has urged action without imposing deadlines. China has declared that its 67% stake in Greece's Piraeus port is not for sale, rejecting U.S. Ambassador Kimberly Ann Guilfoyle's suggestion that the strategic European hub could be sold or countered by expanding U.S. infrastructure. The Chinese embassy has condemned the remarks while insisting that Greek-Chinese relations rooted in Costco's 2016 acquisition will not be shaped by a third-party pressure. According to the German Research Center of Geosciences, a magnitude 6 earthquake has struck Seram, Indonesia, at a depth of 136 kilometers. Meanwhile, Indonesia has evacuated more than 900 people and worked to rescue 170 stranded climbers after Mount Semeru erupted 10 times, spewing ash and lava up to 13 kilometers down its slopes. U.S. officials say long-promised semiconductor tariffs may be delayed as the Trump administration takes a cautious approach to avoid provoking China. The White House says Trump remains committed to boosting domestic manufacturing even as he walks back some tariff plans while seeking a China truce. Now we start with U.S. President Donald Trump has signed a bill requiring the Justice Department to release files related to the late sex of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days. The document includes material from federal criminal investigations, victim and witness interviews, flight logs, and items seized from Epstein's properties, with some files possibly redacted to protect victims or active investigations. Trump previously opposed the release, but reversed course after pressure from Epstein's victims and Republican lawmakers. Congress overwhelmingly passed the resolution with only one Republican voting against it. The files differ from those released earlier from Epstein's estate and could shed more light on his connections to prominent figures. Family members of survivor Virginia Giuffre called the signing monumental, saying every name must be revealed regardless of power or party. Epstein died in 2019 while facing federal sex trafficking charges. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Cliff Smith. He's a lawyer and a former congressional staffer and the Government Affairs Director at NAVI, the North American Values Institute, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, Mr. Cliff, looking at this, what do you think suddenly changed Trump's mind? You know, during his campaign, he was like, I'm going to release it. And then he suddenly said, no, there's no need of releasing that. And now suddenly again, he has now signed the bill to release it.
Well, I think it's really pretty simple. He thought the Epstein files and sort of painting his opponents as, in the pocket of this notorious sex offender was good for him politically. He likes to fancy himself somebody that is against sort of the, this amorphous blob of corruption. And so it was a very good issue for him politically in 2024, so he campaigned on it. The problem is it was always hypocritical. Everybody knew, it was very public actually, if you paid attention, that he had been friends with Jeffrey Epstein, that he had attended different parties. Now, whether or not he is personally implicated in any wrongdoing is a separate question. That I don't know. But it was clear that this was an issue that would potentially get to him. He basically thought he could campaign on it and then not actually follow up and just sort of drop it when the campaign was over. I mean, he's done that before other times. Probably most famously, he went around in 2016 saying, lock her up for Hillary Clinton, and then of course did nothing about it. There was good reason for that. There was never any real plausible way for him to do what he claimed, but he dropped it as soon as the campaign was over and everybody kind of forgot about it. He thought he could do the same thing with the Epstein files. That didn't end up being the case. Too much of his persona was wrapped up in this idea of him being against this, amorphous, corrupt a cabal of elites, and Epstein played too close to that. And the reason he zigzagged back again was quite simply because he was going to lose. It was obvious he was going to lose, and he was going to lose big. He was going to lose at least half the Republicans in Congress, and he was going to lose 100% of the Democrats, which, that isn't surprising. But losing half of his own Republican Party, that would have had effects that went beyond Epstein. There's a lot of ways you can discuss how Trump's influence over the party has worked over the years. It's clearly different than any other Republican president, certainly in my lifetime. And he's never really been openly defied by large numbers of his own party before. That would have changed fundamentally. It would have broken a perception that he can bully people into submission. And that, in turn, would have potentially weakened his grip on the party. He didn't want that. So he zigzagged again and went back in favor. And that's how you wound up with an almost unanimous vote in the House of Representatives and a unanimous vote in the Senate. Without his reversal, you would have still had probably about half the Republicans going against him. And so he decided to preempt that. Whether or not that actually helps preserve his political power over the party over time, we'll see. I don't know.
Yes.
But it was certainly an attempt to preserve that. I think that's pretty clear.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, we stay in the region. U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to meet newly elected New York's incoming mayor, Zohran Mamdani, tomorrow at the White House. The meeting comes after months of political spats between them during New York City's recent mayoral election. Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist who has won the mayoral race earlier this month after defeating former Governor Andrew Cuomo by 9 points. Now, the mayor-elect's team has said that the meeting is only customary for an incoming mayor and will majorly cover public safety, economic security, and affordability. However, previous mayors include Bill de Blasio and Eric Adams did not have such high-profile one-on-one Oval Office meetings so far. Now, we welcome back Mr. Cliff Smith. He's a lawyer and a former congressional staffer and the Government Affairs Director at NAVI. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, Mr. Cliff, looking at this, what are we to expect of their meeting? Because, as we saw, Trump openly openly objected Zohran Mamdani many times. He did not show support for him. Instead, he was showing support for the defeated candidate Andrew Cuomo, and also Zohran Mamdani, even after he was elected or he won, he was looking at the camera and he was like, "I know Trump, you're watching, just increase the volume." He said that. So these kind of rhetoric that they used towards each other, how do you think this, what should we expect from this upcoming meeting, and why do you think Trump particularly made this decision to host him at the White House?
Well, number one, I think you have to look at their enmity in context. The truth of the matter is both of them are useful foils for each other. Both of them like to point to the other one as a representative of everything they're against, and it helps both of them. Much of the country is resentful of New York City, which they see as sort of being the epitome of cultural elitism, of sort of a separate entity for the rest of the country in some ways. It's an epitome of things that they don't like in so-called flyover country, in different parts of the country that aren't New York or LA or DC or a few other areas that are sort of seen as different from the rest of the country. And so that works for Trump, but Mandami, being with the Democrats basically being in lockstep against Trump in a town that is what, 80% plus Democrat, depending how you look at it. I mean, it's a huge amount are Democrats in New York, something like 5-1 Democrats to Republicans. It helps him painting himself in opposition to Trump. So you have to look at their enmity in that context. It is an enmity that is born out of mutual gain for both of them, ironically. When Trump was endorsing Andrew Cuomo, the truth of the matter is that hurt Cuomo. And what's more, Trump knew that hurt Cuomo. He likes Mandami being his foil. It's useful for him politically. Beyond that, as far as what's going to actually happen at the meeting, who knows? I mean, I do think that at the end of the day, Trump needs some cooperation on some issues some of the time from City Hall or New York, or at least we prefer it to the alternative. And alternatively, Mandami definitely needs, at different times, support from the feds. So there's probably some mutually beneficial things they can work out, given how inexperienced Mandami is. Ironically, he's sort of a mirror image Trump. He's a Democrat and he's young, but he's also sort of on the fringes of his party, sort of on the outside of his party, sort of used incendiary rhetoric to get ahead. He's kind of the mirror image Trump. So they'll figure out a few things to work together on, and probably behind the scenes, maybe not. I'm not quite sure, but I do think you need to view the entire thing in the context of the fact that their enmity is largely a show. They actually benefit greatly from each other, and both of them know it.
Thank you for sharing that deep insight, Mr. Cliff Smith, with us on NewsX World. With that, I would like to thank him for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Senior Pentagon officials led by U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll has arrived in Kyiv to discuss efforts to end the war in Ukraine. They met Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko and are expected to meet President Zelensky as well. The visit comes amid reports of a new U.S.-Russia draft peace plan reportedly created by Trump envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev, which would require Ukraine to make major concessions, including giving up parts of the Donbas and reducing its military. Neither Washington nor Moscow have confirmed this plan. Ukrainian and European officials stress any agreement must include Kyiv's input and reject proposals amounting to capitulation. The visit follows deadly Russian attacks in Chernobyl, where at least 26 people were killed. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief, joins us live from Bucharest, Romania. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, Alison, looking at this, what are the political implications of this alleged U.S. Pentagon, not alleged, but U.S. Pentagon officials' visit to Kyiv for Ukraine's sovereignty and the broader U.S.-Russia relations? As we know that just the alleged report show that Russia, U.S.-backed peace plan requires Ukraine to cede territory. How do you think this affects the talks right now?
Well, we've had leaks of the report. They're deliberate leaks. It's a 28-point report. As you said, it requires major territory concessions by Ukraine, even by areas that Ukraine still controls. It requires Ukraine to give up its weapons or part of its armory. It also requires the Russian Orthodox Church to be recognized, and Russian language to be made an official language, which is what Vladimir Putin said at the beginning. He wanted to protect the ethnic Russian minority in Ukraine, and that's so they have a lever. Russia, whatever happens, they need a lever in Ukraine. They need to have influence, and they always have done ever since Ukraine became officially a nation state after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So it's interesting to see, we actually are seeing Russia's goals outlined in a document, even though we haven't seen it. But this is also throwing out these points to see how Ukraine reacts, how Europe reacts. Now, from what we've seen, the peace plan is very heavily in favor of Russia, and it's very unlikely that Ukraine and Europe would agree to it. But at least we do see what Russia wants now. And we also see that Trump administration is at this point seems heavily weighted in favor of Putin, of Russia, which we knew already. But it's important, this is the highest level visit by somebody from the Trump administration since Trump came to office earlier this year. That is important. And he's gone to see, Driscoll, the army secretary, has gone to see what do the Ukrainians have to say about this, what is acceptable and what isn't. Now, of course, Zelensky says they will not accept any territorial concessions. I think at the end of the day, it will depend what territorial concessions. I understand, of course, you understand that he wouldn't accept ceding territory that Russia has not seized already. But there are a variety of other things. So I think the Trump administration is feeling out from Kiev, Zelensky and his prime minister, what would they actually concede to? But then we also have Europe. Europe is very affected by this war, and Europe is very concerned about a Russian offensive, not necessarily today or tomorrow, but in this decade, before 2030. So what we are seeing is what Russia wants. This is obviously not what Ukraine wants, and it's not what Europe wants. So we're very much at the stage of negotiations. But what is important, I think, is that Russia has actually laid out what it wants, and it wants maximalist demands. That means it wants the maximum possible for its aggression in Ukraine, and it wants a lot, and it wants more than it deserves, even with all its war efforts.
And to what extent should U.S. influence peace negotiations versus allowing Ukraine to independently determine concessions in this case? As you also mentioned that Russia is asking for more than it's right or it deserves, and not deserves, maybe that's not the right word, but
that's not the word. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. And how do you think
it's more than it militarily gained?
Yes.
It's made military efforts. It has made some gains, but it's asking for much more than it gained on the battlefield.
Yes, 100%.
That's what I mean.
100%. And how effective do you think would be whatever comes out of these talks, including after Zelensky meets with the U.S. officials?
I think it's very important because obviously what we hear publicly that Ukraine will never agree to any concessions. Well, Crimea is a case. I mean, it's unclear whether Ukraine will ever get that back. I can't say. But there are obviously what Ukraine and Russia say publicly and what they say privately, which won't necessarily be made public. But it's very clear. We know that Donald Trump, his administration, wants an end to this war. He wants to claim victory for the person who's been able to bring peace to the worst conflict we've had in Europe since the Second World War. So that's important to him. He obviously listens more to Putin than Zelensky, but that has changed somewhat. But you can't come to a peace agreement unless you have both sides agreeing. So I don't see this being settled very soon. And I think that the Driscoll and his team, the Pentagon team, going to Kiev today, will find out how much Ukraine will agree to. And they also will find out the Ukrainian perspective. I'm sure they'll be laying out, the savage aggression that Russia has, is the relentless aggression that Russia has waged against Ukraine and on its cities and on its civilian residential population, as well as the military and energetic. And those reports will be brought back to Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump does want a peace deal. I think Ukraine probably wants a peace deal, but not on any terms. The word we keep hearing is capitulation. Ukraine has put up a very, very fierce fight. A war that Russia thought would take a few days has almost gone on for 4 years. So Ukraine's not just going to give up because they have fought back and they have defended their territory. And there's no reason why they should, even though they want peace. They don't want an unjust peace because they feel, and as many European leaders feel, that if they give in to Russian concessions that Russian should not have, then Russia will continue its aggression because Russia is pushing for maximalist demands as much as it can get. It's part of their ideology. This is not just a war. We want to defend the ethnic Russian population, but they are deeply feel that they want to destroy liberal democracies because they also have this hybrid war, which is being waged in the whole of Europe. So they are be pushing for as much as they can get, and it's up to Ukraine and it's up to Europe to stand up to that. But by the same token, I think most countries do want peace, but not peace at any price.
100%. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us and sharing that insight today from Bucharest. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. After a record-long government shutdown, according to a delayed employment report published, the U.S. jobless rate crept up in September, even as hiring exceeded analysts' expectations. It's the first publication, the first official snapshot of the overall labor markets held in over 2 months. The world's biggest economy added 119,000 jobs in the month, up from August, but the unemployment rate edged up from 4.3% to 4.4% as per the Labor Department. Nonetheless, the report will have implications for the Federal Reserve, where policymakers are deciding whether to make a third consecutive interest rate cut this year at their next policy meeting in December. The Labor Department report has also showed that the employment situation was gloomier than originally estimated in August, with the economy losing 4,000 jobs instead of logging gains. Now we move on to Africa. President Donald Trump has vowed to work on ending Sudan's civil war after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman asked him to intervene. The conflict, which erupted in 2023 between Sudan's army and the Parliamentary Rapid Support Forces, has killed tens of thousands and displaced nearly 12 million people. Trump has said that he would use the influence of the presidency to halt the tremendous atrocities in Sudan, working with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and other Middle Eastern partners. Sudan's Sovereign Council, led by Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has welcomed the U.S. and Riyadh's involvement. The announcement follows Trump's long focus on conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, while the Sudan war has received little attention. The crisis worsened after the RSF seized El Fasher in Darfur, sparking concerns of crime against humanity and genocide. Trump has emphasized stabilizing Sudan and ending the humanitarian crisis, calling it the most violent place on earth. President Donald Trump has vowed to work of ending Sudan's civil war. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ayanagauluk Bengapol. He's a public affairs analyst, joins us live from Lagos. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now again, U.S. has, not again, but Trump has shown to interest in breaking a peace between two countries. What are the potential risks and benefits of U.S. involvement in Sudan's civil war under Trump's leadership? And to what extent do you think U.S. foreign policy is now the Trump administration is driven or motivated by humanitarian crisis versus strategic or political interests in Sudan?
Well, I think it is more strategic interest. Maybe they were weighing their options before now because we've been calling for U.S. intervention, while U.S. have been spending a lot of money on Ukraine and a lot of other places where the level of casualty and infliction of terror is not as much as Sudan. This sudden change we may never know in full what informed it right now, because we know that U.S. does not do anything for the sake of God or for the sake of I want help. There must be a catch behind the scene. But I don't think we should be concerned that much about the catch at the moment, but about the potential for this intervention to be able to solve the humanitarian crisis that is going on there, in that the RSF will be hitting back, or the Sudan government will be forced to sit down and have a talk now that a higher force is coming into the argument and the arrangement. So I believe that this will help ease the tension on the civilian population, whether it will now be on the long run for the benefit. Because if I am to calculate based on the regional importance of that area and some of the strategic influences going on there, with the closeness of that country to the likes of Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Co, I think that U.S. has interest in ensuring that this situation is lived in, because most likely maybe one faction, either the government faction or the RSF faction, is being sponsored by other interests that does not align with U.S. long-term interests, and they have been looking away thus far, or they have been too slow to act on the intel report that they've gotten on the matter. But now, maybe they have been looking up a new set of intel reports that makes them know that losing Sudan to another axis of power like China or Russia will mean a lot of terrible things down the road for them, and that is why they are now waking up. But I don't want to believe that the US is doing this because it cares about the humans and whatever in Sudan. I believe there is a catch, but I am not worried much about what the catch is. I am interested in the stability and peace that this intervention by the US will bring to the Sudanese civilians who are caught up in the crossfire between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces at the moment. So for that, I will say kudos first and foremost to the US government and to President Donald Trump for this intervention.
Right. And talking about potential of peace after U.S. intervention with support from other countries mentioned like Saudi Arabia and UAE and Egypt, this involving UAE, the very controversial country in relations to Sudan crisis, how do you think this influences the peace efforts and legitimacy of it?
Well, I think by the time the playbook is open to the Sudanese armed forces and the Sudanese government, maybe because it was the Sudanese government that were opposed to the inclusion of Qatar in this negotiation round, because they believe that Qatar were sponsoring the RSF in one way or the other, even though that claim has been debunked by Qatari government and other stakeholders. But I'm sure that other details that might not be available to the public, especially the media community, because of the sensitivity and nature of the matter, would have made available to them for the Sudanese government to be willing to cooperate and welcome this intervention by the United States of America. And I'm sure that whatever the interest of Qatar is, if it does not align with the interest of the US would not have acted, and the US acting to ensure that his interest in the region is protected, and of course there is peace in the region.
Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Anagal Lukbenkapol for joining us as public affairs analyst and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. 5 people pleaded guilty on Wednesday to terrorism-related charges in Texas, United States, after they were accused of supporting Antifa in a July shooting that wounded a police officer outside the Prairie Land Detention Center near Dallas. The charges followed President Trump's designating Antifa as the domestic terrorist organization. The defendants Nathan Bowman, Joy Gibson, Seth Sykes, and Lynette Sharp and John Thomas have admitted providing material support to terrorists and faces up to 15 years in prison. Court documents say the attack involved gunfire and fireworks, targeting the facility, wounding a police officer in the neck who returned fire. Some defendants helped the shooter avoid arrest. Cases against others involved in the incident remain ongoing. The shooting happened as the Trump administration increased deportations days later. Another attack near the Mexico border left a police officer injured after an assault rifle fire at the federal agents. Now we move on to Europe. Spain's Supreme Court has found the country's chief prosecutor, Alvaro Garcia Ortiz, guilty of leaking confidential information about a tax fraud case involving the partner of a senior opposition figure. In an unprecedented ruling, the court disqualified Garcia Ortiz from holding the office for 2 years and ordered him to pay a total fine of $8,402. The decision that can be appealed is a blow to the government of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who appointed Garcia Ortiz in 2022, and raises questions about the separation of powers in the country. And that's a wrap on America 360. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.